Hi everyone, my name is Leanne Lester and I would like to welcome you to the Centre for Social Impacts Research Seminar Series. I'd like to begin first by acknowledging that we're on Whadjuk Noongar land here at the University of Western Australia and pay our respects to the elders of this land. Today, our topic is the economic evaluation of alternative urban park designs that conserve irrigation water. Today we have two speakers, Professor David Pannell and Dr. Claire Doll. David is a Professor of Agriculture and Resource Economics at UWA. He's co-director of the Centre for Environmental Economics and Policy and a Fellow of the Academy of Social Sciences in Australia. His research includes the economics of land, water and nature conservation, environmental policy, farmer adoption of conservation practices, risk, and the economics of farming systems. Claire is a research associate in the Centre for Environmental Economics and Policy. Her PhD research focused on the economics of urban green space, including parks and verges. Her current research includes work aiming to improve Australia's system of biodiversity offsets, evaluation of options for river restoration, and Indigenous fire management practices under climate change. I would like to welcome both David and Claire to start their presentation. Please use the comment section for any questions, which we will address at the end of the session. Just to let everyone know, this session is being recorded and will be put up on the CSI website. Thanks, everyone. Over to you, David.
Thanks very much, Leanne. So yes, as Leanne said, we're going to do this in two parts. I will give an introduction to the issues around benefit cost analysis and using benefit cost analysis to do evaluations of social and environmental projects and policies. And then Claire will step in and present an example, an illustration of that related to urban park design. So Claire's running my slides for me, so let's go forward. And again. Okay, so I'm going to assume here that there's a mixed audience and that there will be some people who are online who are familiar with benefit cost analysis, but some who are not. So my presentation will be at the basic end of the spectrum to try and bring people up to speed and make them aware of what the options and the opportunities are with benefit cost analysis and get to a point where you can grasp what Claire is presenting later on. So benefit cost analysis is one of the most important tools in economics. It's certainly the most widely used tool in economics, and it's used to assess what you might call initiatives, or I'll probably call them projects or policies perhaps, and that could include both future potential projects that aren't in place yet, but also it's a way of evaluating and assessing past completed projects. It's extremely flexible, and as I've said, it's also extremely widely used. And in some circles of government, it's compulsory to use it for certain purposes. Thanks, Claire. And the essential question, of course, it's built into the name, is do the overall benefits of the project or policy exceed the overall costs? And if you say it quickly like that, it sounds simple, but it's not hard to imagine that it's actually quite challenging to answer that question in many cases. One of the challenges is that conducting a meaningful benefit cost analysis is information rich. It requires a lot of information to be collected, and it provides a structure and a framework that helps you collect that information in a systematic way, consolidate it, and logically combine it in a systematic way to help inform decision makers. It also usually means that the analyst has to work quite closely with the relevant body that's responsible for the project or the policy to understand that project or policy, but also to obtain information that they need to actually do the analysis. Now, in the way that we will be presenting its use today, it's really designed to be helpful for supporting decisions. And it's helpful for several reasons, which I've sort of half alluded to already. It's helpful because it's a systematic approach. It can be done in a way where the thinking and the analysis and the results are very transparent. You can see why a certain result has been obtained and you can interrogate that result. And as far as possible, it aims to be strongly evidence-based. But it's worth acknowledging that in almost all cases, it's not a simple prescription for a decision because it usually can't capture absolutely everything that you'd like to consider. So, for example, sometimes a factor that might influence whether a project is supported will be considerations over who will pay for that project, who has the resources and who's willing to actually spend those resources to get the project to happen. That's something that you wouldn't normally build directly into a benefit cost analysis, but it could go into discussions and considerations alongside it. I'm going to run through a few principles and concepts related to benefit cost analysis so you can get a sense of some of the depth of thinking that lies behind it. The first one is what I'm calling the with versus without principle, which is just the pretty simple idea that in trying to work out what benefits have arisen from a project, it's important to compare what you anticipate will happen with the project compared to what would have happened if there was no project. And the key trick here is that this is different from a before versus after comparison in most cases, because the world isn't static. And we very often expect that in the absence of the project that we're thinking about doing, that the world would not stay static. So in this graph, you can see some measure of values or benefits being generated by a resource. And in the absence of a new project, it's predicted that the dotted line is showing us that those values would slowly decline over time, whereas if we have the project, they're expected to increase. And the key insight is that at any point in time, in any one of those years, as we go from left to right, the benefit of the project is the vertical distance between those two lines. So it's not hard to understand, and of course it's relevant to any type of evaluation, but it's particularly emphasised in undertaking a benefit cost analysis. Now, one of the things that we have to worry about is measuring the benefits, and so where possible, when we're doing a benefit cost analysis, we would like to measure the benefits as well as the costs in monetary terms, or at least in some monetary equivalent terms, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the advantage of this is that it allows the benefits to be compared for different projects very easily because they're in a common currency. But it also allows the benefits to be compared with the costs for the same project. So you can actually make deductions about whether the overall benefits exceed the overall costs, which is very difficult if we are not expressing everything in the same currency. And the standard measurement method that we use is something we term willingness to pay. And what this is the answer to this question. If people had to pay for the benefit that we think might occur, what is the most that they would be prepared to pay? And that's quite a general concept that applies to all different types of benefits, and it's the one that we will utilise in the example that Claire presents. Now, one of the issues that can be a bit of a challenge is that projects can generate many different types of benefits. And so we're interested in trying to quantify the willingness to pay for all the different benefit types that can arise from a project. And potentially in some cases also disbenefits. Some projects have unintended negative consequences. Sometimes those unintended consequences are anticipated and you can sort of say, yes, we're going to do this to get these benefits. We expect it'll have this downside, but we're still going to do it, but we need to capture that downside and account for it. Or we'll still consider whether we do the project and we'll build the downsides in as well as the sort of financial costs of doing the project. In many cases, when we're doing a benefit cost analysis to evaluate a project, we don't need to break the benefits down into their component elements. So, for example, if a project is reducing water pollution, we might anticipate that there are benefits related to the aesthetics of the environment, having a benign physical environment that's not damaging people's health, recreational satisfaction of people who can, recreate by that water body, maybe some spiritual, philosophical contentment, maybe happiness that biodiversity is being enhanced by the reduction in pollution, and so on. There could be a variety of different things. And it might be helpful to anticipate break the benefits down into all those components in order to help us sort of target effort into particular parts of the package. But in terms of an overall decision about whether the project is worth doing or not, a defined project, then we actually don't really need to do that. We can just, all we're really interested in is the totality of the benefits. And some of the methods that we have for estimating willingness to pay of environmental benefits make it quite difficult to break it down. Not impossible, but quite challenging. All right, next. It's possible to identify four broad categories of benefits that require different information sources, and they probably have to be calculated and processed in different ways. And so these are market benefits, or you might call them simple financial benefits, non-market benefits, so the more intangible non-financial benefits, the issue of reduced or delayed costs that can occur as a result of improving something through a project, or the potential to reduce some risk. Perhaps a project would reduce the probability of a flood or reduce the consequence of a flood if it occurred. So that's another one. So all of these are potentially relevant. All right, another issue that we have to grapple with is the issue of time. And a very common pattern that we see is that the benefits of a project tend to be weighted more into the future, as you can see with the sort of yellowy lines in this graph. The benefits are increasing over time, whereas the costs can occur at any point in time, but they tend to be more weighted towards the present. So we've got this challenge of comparing, loosely speaking, current or short-term costs versus long-term future distant benefits, which can be quite challenging. Now, one obvious thing to do is to worry about inflation to bring those future benefits back to present value terms. But there's more to it than that, because we also need to worry about the fact that the cost that we incur in the short term could have been spent on something else and could have generated some other benefits. So economists refer to that, the fact that we're not doing that, as an opportunity cost. And there's an opportunity cost of capital. And we want to factor that into the consideration as well. So that's done with a process called discounting, which we use to convert future benefits and costs into present values, accounting for both inflation and this opportunity cost of capital, so that they are validly comparable. Okay. And then just to finish up, there's a couple more complexities that we need to think about and worry about capturing to make sure that our final results are robust and have considered all relevant factors. There could be a risk of project failure. Not all projects succeed as we would like. So there's various techniques to try and quantify what those risks might be and to scale and weight the results to take account of that. In many cases, decision makers are interested in the distribution of benefits and costs amongst stakeholders. We want to know, for example, it could be important to know, is this a project where the costs are mainly incurred by a disadvantaged group and the benefits are mainly captured by a thoroughly advantaged group, and vice versa? That could influence decision making, and benefit cost analysis provides a really good framework to help us to quantify and allocate the distribution of benefits and costs for that sort of thinking. We might need to worry about the degree of behaviour change that's likely to occur. For some types of projects, the level of benefits we get depend on how much people change their behaviour. Sometimes they might change it a lot. Sometimes it might be really difficult to get that behaviour change. So we want to factor that in as well. And then there's a series of sort of what I'm calling here errors and pitfalls, really difficult challenges or traps you can fall into if you don't, if you're not well trained and you don't really know what you're doing. And that includes things like, we don't want to double count benefits, which is a thing that sometimes you do see. We don't want to include multiplier effects in a benefit cost analysis because for various reasons it's not a valid thing to do. We want to avoid having a poor definition of the without project scenario. I showed the without project scenario in that with versus without scenario graph that I showed, so you can get a sense of that's a relevant consideration. We want a logically consistent project definition, and we don't want to include depreciation costs, which sometimes people fall into that trap, because the depreciation is irrelevant if we're doing discounting, which we always are doing in a benefit cost analysis. Okay, so you can get a bit of a sense of the range of issues that are attempted to be captured in benefit cost analysis. It's quite a rich field. I teach a course in it. It's a 12-week course, so there's a lot to cover, and that's really just an introductory course, to be honest. So this has been a very quick skirting over some of these issues, but I hope it's given you an opportunity to sort of get a sense of what it's about and some of the factors that are included. And I'll hand over now to Claire.
Okay, thank you, David. So I am going to present the second half of this webinar, which will be a case study that is titled, the title of this talk. This is research that was conducted as part of my PhD that was supervised by David Pannell and Michael Burton. And the broad question that this PhD addressed is, how can local governments adapt to rising water scarcity, potentially decreased water licenses, while still providing welfare enhancing parks to the public? And specifically, this benefit cost analysis looks at what the optimal mix of different ground covers are in urban parks. And just to quickly acknowledge the funders of my PhD, we have the Forest Research Foundation, the Government of WA Department of Water and Environmental Regulation, and the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. I'm going to present a really brief overview of this BCA paper. As David mentioned, there's a lot that goes into this research, and if you are interested in the full details, you can find it published in the Australian Journal of Agricultural and Resource Economics. So first, we look at the benefits that we're going to factor into our BCA. This is a separate study altogether. It is published here in Ecological Economics, and it's based on a choice experiment study, which ultimately elicits public preferences for different park designs. And that brings us to this willingness to pay estimate of changes from our baseline park design to different alternatives that vary in the amount of water that they would need in their maintenance. So to get this survey right, we worked really closely with a range of different park managers. We worked with about 20 different local governments to understand what the baseline scenario is and what realistic alternative project options would be. And the data was ultimately collected using a panel managed by a market research company, and we had over 1,500 residents of the Perth region contribute to this research. So for those of you who may not be familiar with what a choice experiment is, it's basically presenting the public with a range of different future policy scenarios and asking them to make repeated choices of their most preferred scenario. So in our case, in this study, we showed survey respondents 6 of these different scenarios. On the left-hand side, it was always the same scenario. It's our baseline, typical, local neighborhood park design in Perth. It has 80% watered grass and 20% mulch, some tree canopy cover, and we've asked respondents to imagine that their council rates would increase by about $200 a year. Then on the right-hand side, we show them different possible designs that again vary in their watering needs. So in this choice card, we're showing a change to 100% watered grass, some more tree canopy cover, but also a higher payment in council rates or rent. Again, here's just another iteration of this choice card where we asked respondents, if these were your 2 options for your local park, which one would you choose? Here's a case where it's no watered grass, 100% native vegetation, but instead of paying $200 more a year, you're only paying $50. So overall, we looked at 4 different ground covers: watered grass, non-watered grass, native vegetation, and mulch. 3 of them varied between 0 and 100% cover, but mulch we capped off at 40% after feedback that you'd never really have 100% mulch in a park. We looked at 3 different tree canopy cover levels, and we looked at a range of different changes in council rates or rent, varying between $0 and $400 a year. So altogether, we looked at 37 different design combinations. That's different combinations of the 4 ground covers and the 3 levels of tree canopy cover. But we actually had more like 60 total design combinations when you factor in the different costs for the different park changes. So respondents were randomly shown 6 of those different designs and asked which one would you most prefer. So we collected a lot of information on public preferences there. I'm aware that we have a pretty diverse audience today, so I won't go too much into the economic modeling here. But what I wanted to highlight is some general trends. This is the results for the population as a whole. In the paper, we do provide some more information about different preferences by different subsets of the population, but this provides a pretty good overall picture. We can see that the estimate is negative for tax. People don't like paying more money. People like more tree canopy cover, but that negative term with the tree squared shows that there is some leveling off. More is better, but up until a certain point, more becomes less good. And there are similar trends for water grass. People like water grass in parks, but at a certain point, it does level off. There's a limit to how much they like. Now, relative to mulch cover, people are relatively indifferent between mulch and non-watered grass, although too much non-watered grass, again, is not preferred. And people are also quite keen on native vegetation, but again, it levels off at a certain point. Now, jumping straight to the key headliner results from that study, because again, we're just looking at our benefit estimates to feed into our benefit cost analysis. We found that the optimal park design in terms of the mix of ground covers that the public most preferred, that gave them the highest level of utility or happiness, was 56% native vegetation and 44% water grass. So comparing this to that default baseline that we had defined of 80% water grass and 20% mulch, it's a pretty substantial change in design. And on average, we found that households would be willing to pay about $213 per household per year to change from that baseline to this alternative park and see that in their neighborhood instead. So that's our benefits. I'll let you anchor onto that number, 213. But we do look at more than just that one alternative park design when we go into our benefit cost analysis. What we do is we compare 6 different projects that a local government could choose to implement in their own park management scenario. We range between 0% water grass in design 1 and 100% water grass in design 6, and we vary them at 20% intervals between the different designs. Now, the remaining ground covers in these 6 different designs aren't randomly selected. They're made up of what we're calling a constrained optimization. So that is the remaining combined ground covers that make people happiest on average. And you can see that in all of the designs that are not 100% watered grass, that includes a substantial proportion of native vegetation. And at the lower end, designs 1 and 2, it also includes some non-watered grass and even mulch in the case of design 1. So we can, again, build on our results from the choice experiment benefit side study and estimate some willingness to pay values for all of these 6 different park designs, not just that optimal park design that I presented in the results earlier. So you can see on the farthest right-hand column there that for designs 1 to 5, there's a positive willingness to pay to change from the baseline park design of 80% watered grass and 20% mulch to the other possible designs that we're considering in the analysis. The only difference is design 6, which is actually 100% watered grass, and that has a negative willingness to pay, or it means that people would need to be compensated $100 per household per year to be as well off as they were with the original design as they would be with that alternative design. So we've got our benefits. Now we look at our costs. Coming up with robust cost assumptions is not always easy in benefit cost analysis, and it often relies on close relationships with subject matter experts who are actually doing the management on the ground. So we worked with local governments, with 11 different local governments, to try and get cost estimates to factor into our benefit cost analysis. And this was really experts' best, I don't want to say best guess, but best experience based estimate in providing a cost on a dollar per square meter basis. And the reason is that this isn't always how costs and contracting actually is accounted for in real life. You know, you might get one big project and it isn't necessarily considering the cost on a square meter for the different ground cover types. So we've collected a wide range of estimates. We do record all of these estimates, including the minimum and the maximum, but they're basically broken down into preparation costs, what it takes to get the land ready to be planted, the planting costs. We assume that for watered grass, you'd be installing an irrigation system as part of the development process, whereas for native vegetation, you'd be selecting drought-resistant varietals that would need watering trucks in their establishment for the first 3 years, and then after that point, just would be fully established and not require regular watering, and ongoing maintenance costs, again, broken down by the 4 different ground covers. So we've got our benefits and we've got our costs, and we're ready to get going with our benefit cost analysis. In this study, we operationalize our BCA using a tool called Infuse. This is a tool that was developed by David Pannell and colleague Saeed Iftikhar, and it's a really comprehensive Excel-based tool that can be great when working with stakeholders, because you can really clearly outline all of the assumptions that you're making in your BCA, and it explicitly accounts for project risk, adoption risk. It includes some sensitivity analysis, and it just really outlines all of the core components of your BCA in a really clear way. So it's really useful in research, but also in working in project jobs. And I know that David mentioned he teaches BCA in a micro-credential format, and I think that there have been some government staff taking this class too, and I think it's been quite useful for them. So for our benefit cost analysis, I won't go into too much detail about all of these assumptions that we're making, but basically we're assuming that we're dealing with land that's going to be a park. We're not considering the possible value of developing this land into a set of apartments or a shopping mall. We're looking at a 1 hectare park. So that's how the costs and benefits are scaled up. We look at 2 different versions of park design, 1 developing a brand new park, and 2 making changes to an existing baseline park of 80% watered grass and 20% mulch. We look over 30 years. We're scaling up our benefit estimates, assuming that 1 individual local or neighborhood park would serve about 350 households. So that's multiplying that willingness to pay value by that many households. And for this baseline analysis, we assume that there is no cost to access groundwater, which is the primary source of irrigation in many parks around the Perth region, that this water is just accessed via the groundwater license. However, in the full paper, we do look at some different BCA scenarios that look at different possible water costs and what that would do to the overall results. And yes, again, we do a range of sensitivity analyses that I won't necessarily have time to go into here. Jumping straight to our results. Here I'm presenting the net present value of changing from the baseline park design to these 6 different alternatives. And these are in thousands of dollars. What I'll highlight first is that the highest NPV result is for changes from the baseline park to design 3. So that design 3 is with 60% native vegetation and 40% watered grass. It's also interesting to note that most of the NPVs are positive, and where the NPV is greater than 0, it's typically a sign of a project that is likely to provide benefits to society. But design 6, so that's 100% watered grass design, that has a negative NPV. And so does design 1. in the existing park scenario. So that's changing the existing park, the baseline park design, to the alternative with no watered grass at all. As a different way of looking at these results, here we can present the annualized benefits and costs. So the solid line that's going above the top, that's our compensating surplus benefits or our willingness to pay for the 6 different park designs. On the x-axis, you can see the 6 different designs based on the percentage of watered grass cover that they have. And the 2 dotted lines below are the annualized costs for converting the baseline park to these 6 different alternatives, either based on establishing a brand new park or making changes to an existing park. So what matters with this graph is that you're looking for the biggest difference between the willingness to pay and the costs, and that's going to be the highest NPV outcome and the most preferred design from a societal perspective here. Another way of looking at the results of a BCA is to understand which specific inputs to the BCA analysis itself is driving the results. So if we focus on our highest NPV result, that was the 60% native vegetation and 40% watered grass design 3, we can see there are certain variables that are positively and negatively influencing that NPV. So the light gray is the positive impact. It's primarily our non-market benefits, that willingness to pay value for the change from the baseline to this design. But you also have some positive factors in the relative savings in watered grass maintenance that you would otherwise have with your baseline design. At the same time, you have some extra costs, like the maintenance of native vegetation. So that makes sense because in the baseline park, there was no native vegetation at all. And so these would be new costs introduced with this alternative design. This is just a quick little snapshot of our sensitivity analysis. We run sensitivity analysis through Infuse. It builds in a pretty robust simulation of different possible costs and assumptions that you could work into your BCA. And basically, we do this to see how robust our results are to the assumptions that we've made about the benefits and the costs. So we can set different bounds on what the parameters might be. For example, what the public willingness to pay might actually be, plus or minus 30%. And what's interesting here is that the results are quite robust. For the most part, even when we're looking at a wide range of different assumptions, we can see that the NPV is almost always going to be greater than 0. Okay, now to wrap up, again, we asked, what is the optimal mix of different ground covers in urban parks? And I started by showing the results of our choice experiment study. So that's just looking at benefits and not factoring in costs. And there we showed that the optimal mix of vegetation was 56% native vegetation and 44% watered grass. Then we moved on to our benefit cost analysis and added in those cost estimates that we obtained from our partners in local government, and the results were pretty consistent. The highest NPV results was that design that has 60% native vegetation and 40% watered grass. So we think this is kind of a neat result. It's kind of an unusual and enjoyable scenario where we find there's the potential to conserve water and provide greater benefits to the public and also save costs by rethinking our typical urban park design to include a little bit less watered grass area and more native vegetation cover. And I've included a range of places that you could go if you want any more details on any of these studies, but I will stop now for questions. Thanks.
Thanks, David and Claire. A fascinating presentation and a really good practical example of benefit cost analysis. If people would like to put their questions in the chat, that would be fantastic. But I do have a translation question for you, Claire, because this is some fantastic work. Have local councils made changes based on your findings?
It's been really enjoyable working on this project, especially because a lot of this work was done while as a PhD student. Enjoyable because there's been a lot of interest from local councils and also from the Park Managers Association of Western Australia in learning about this work and understanding it. So I can't necessarily pinpoint any specific park that has changed as a result of this, but I can say that there's really been a positive reception to these results. And that's helped with ground truthing the assumptions. You know, people are nodding along when I present to the experts in this space, in part because there was experts involved in actually doing the study. But I would say overall that you're starting to notice a bit of a change in norms around town. So when this project started, it was pretty clearly a baseline of 80% watered grassland parks, but now I think you can start looking around and see more native vegetation cover in these public parks.
Thanks, Claire. David, a question for you. In terms of benefit cost analysis, there are many challenges in estimating intangible monetary values. Can you comment on some of those challenges that you've come across?
Sure. Yeah. So, yes. So Claire talked about one particular technique that economists have developed to try to monetize these intangible, non-financial benefits, and that was the choice experiment. And that's done with a survey approach. And there's actually another survey-based approach, which is broadly similar, called contingent valuation. And I guess the good thing about those survey-based approaches is that they're very flexible. You can ask the community about a huge variety of different types of projects and the sorts of benefits that might arise. The challenge with them is that the questions you're putting to people are hypothetical. And so you can't be certain how accurate, how close to the mark the results that they're giving you are. But nevertheless, I mean, of course, that's an issue that's been researched as well, and so we are reasonably confident that the results are not crazy. They're within. There's usually a bit of exaggeration, which can. But sort of,
Oh, sorry, David, you've just cut out there. If you could just go back.
Based on observing actions make, also be you. The text of the study that Claire's just presented, one of those approaches is sorry?
Sorry, David, you just cut. I don't know if it was just me, but it just cut out from my end.
Oh, where did I cut out?
Pretty close to after the fact that
where did I stop?
The estimates can be inflated sometimes, and we have some techniques to account for that.
I'm just going to try and see if I can change my internet connection.
While David is working on that, I'll just mention that's one of the reasons why it's so important to do the sensitivity analyses like we've done in our benefit cost analysis study. And of interest in this particular study that I presented on, although I didn't mention it in this presentation, we also looked at a scenario where we set the non-market benefits to 0 if you totally don't believe in them at all. And that just becomes more of like a cost effectiveness or a cost savings analysis. And we actually found that there would still be benefits to changing, even if you set those benefits to 0. I'll let you take it away,
Sorry,
David.
I'm back. I'm on a better internet connection now, I think. So the other approach is based on observing the value of natural environmental issues like a park and how much of that is built into house prices. So it's possible, a house price depends on a whole lot of things, the number of rooms and the area of the block and how many car parks and so on. But one of the things it depends on is the local environmental conditions and its access to local amenities like parks. And so if you have enough observations of house sales and enough data about those different features, you can back out statistically how much of a house price is attributable to living close to a beautiful park, and potentially how much of it's attributable to living close to parks with different designs. So then in that case, you are avoiding the potential concerns about the hypothetical nature of the survey approaches.
Right. Thank you. We do have one question in the chat from Kit, who is curious if you have contacted Chris Ferreira from the Forever Project with some of the work he has done in this space with Watercorp and the amount of wasted water runoff from poorly designed retic systems.
We have not, but that's a very interesting kind of extension of this research area, which is to look at other possible water sources and similarly look at how much waste is happening with the current system. David, anything to add?
No, I don't know, Chris, actually, but yeah, obviously there's a variety of ways we can tackle the issue of trying to conserve water, but no, we haven't looked at that one.
Thank you so much, David and Claire, for your time today, and thank you for everyone who's listening. As we mentioned earlier, this is recorded and will be going up on the CSI website. If you have any further questions, please contact ourselves or David and Claire, and we'll be happy to answer them. Thank you very much for your time today.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.